So what Amla City asked me to do was to talk to you about my life and to talk to you about the Bodhisattva ideal of later Buddhism. So I'm going to try and do that. He also, just to make it a little bit harder, asked me to do it all in half an hour. So I'll have a go at that. And I'll try and tie the two of them together as well. So it's like I've been given two topics and I've given a short time and I've been asked to tie the two of them together. So I'll have a go at it. I might or might not use the flip chart at some point. I've got these notes about my life, not so much because I don't remember my life, but because I don't want to go off on a tangent anymore. So maybe the most salient thing, I grew up in rural Ireland in the 1950s and 60s. I was born in 55. And the main thing to characterize that upbringing was that in that place at that time, it was a kind of theocracy. So the Catholic Church controlled everything. Politically, it was controlled. Culturally, educationally, everything was controlled by the Catholic Church. So my early life had quite a big indoctrination with Catholicism, yeah, from the age of about 5, both at home, in school, and in the culture around me. However, that didn't seem to work with me, because actually when I was about 16 I gave up completely Catholicism. I just didn't believe it anymore, so I gave it up. I didn't have anything to replace it. I left school when I was just before I was 18. I was 17, and I left home when I was 17. I left rural Ireland where I was brought up, and I went to London. I had some brothers and sisters. I came from a big family, as you would expect. I have 4 sisters and 2 brothers, so some of them were in London. And so from the age of 18, let's say, I was in London. And I started working and had a career. I was training to be an accountant or an auditor, working by day, studying by night, that kind of thing. But I wasn't happy. I was not a happy youngster. I wasn't happy at all. And one of the things that I wasn't happy about is I didn't have a sense of anything meaningful in my life. I could see quite clearly that I could have a career and I could have lots of money and so on, but it didn't seem to satisfy me. And I had this experience one time in the job where I was working in the city of London. I was working with a big firm of accountants, and there was a man there who was probably in his 60s, and he retired, and he'd been with their company all his life, all his working life. And so he had his farewell due and was given his gift and all the rest of it. What I noticed is he came back quite regularly for, some months later. He used to come back to visit people. And I noticed after a while that people didn't want to see him, that they regarded him as a kind of like a nuisance almost. And I just thought it was incredibly sad that he'd spent all his life in this company with a lot of these people, and actually they weren't his friends. He probably thought they were his friends, but they weren't really his friends. And that had a big impact on me when I was about 20, 21, I can't remember exactly. So that had a big impact on me. I was also really desperately trying to figure out what life was about. To me, that was such an issue. I just couldn't understand what the point of it was, in a way. So I was reading lots of things and so on. And when I was about 21, I had a dream, literally. One night I had a dream. I won't tell you my dreams. People's dreams are often boring, but this particular dream had a big impact on me. It stayed with me for about a year, and as a result of it, I gave up my career, and I gave up all that kind of future that was waiting for me, quite deliberately. And I kind of knew at the time, I remember thinking to myself, this means that I'll never be wealthy. I'll never have money. And actually that's turned out to be the case. That's been true. I've never been wealthy in a material sense. I feel very wealthy in other ways. So that was when I was about 22. I gave that up. I still had no idea what I really wanted from life or what life was about. But I deliberately set out to try and find out. So what I did is I undertook kind of a journey, first of all on foot through England and Wales and Scotland. I just walked, partly because it was a cheap way to live, and partly because I saw it as a kind of symbolic journey. And then later I did a similar thing around the continent on a bicycle. I used to cycle around Europe. And it was always, I had this sense of it as being a kind of symbolic journey, searching for something. I ended up living in West Berlin, as it was then, surrounded by the wall. And after 2 years and so there, I came across Buddhism. So I was about 27 by then. And immediately, I came across Buddhism at a Buddhist temple on the outskirts of Berlin, a Sri Lankan Buddhist temple. I used to go there to read books because they had books in English, and they had a beautiful garden. It was on the top of a hill with a beautiful garden. And the very last time I went there, one of the monks came up to me and spoke to me. And he asked me if I meditated. And I had learned a meditation from a book. So I said, yes, I do. And he said, what do you do? And I told him, and he said, that's not meditation. And he taught me the metta bhavana. And he also talked to me about the 5 precepts. And it was actually hearing about the 5 precepts that made me a Buddhist. What I'd been looking for was, I suppose, what you might call a practical spirituality, a way of living your life that was in a kind of meaningful direction spiritually. And it was the 5 precepts that really grabbed me. It was the 5 precepts plus the monk, because there was something about the monk, there was a congruency between what he was telling me and himself and his life and the way he was. So that really struck me. And it was a result of meeting that man that I became a Buddhist. Quite like that, overnight I became a Buddhist. I changed my ethical behaviour and so on, which needed a bit of changing at the time. So I did pretty much overnight. And I never actually met him again, by the way. The next time I went back to Berlin, he had gone back to Sri Lanka. And he was, as I said, he was in his 60s or something when I met him. And I've never met him since. But he did ask me, as it happens, he did ask me to send him a photograph of myself, because he said he wanted to put me in his metta bhavana. And I did send him a photograph, so probably I've been floating on the waves of his metta ever since. So I left Berlin in 1983, and I eventually made my way back to London. And in London, about a year after I'd met that monk, I got involved with this Buddhist movement, Triratna, in London, at the London Buddhist Centre in Bethnal Green. And yes, I got involved there, and I think the first 4 or 5 years, actually before that, just to say, although I'd become a Buddhist, I didn't really know anything about Buddhism, and I didn't know how to practice anything. I didn't really know how to practice meditation or anything like that. I was reading books, reading lots of books, but I was just getting more and more confused, so I didn't actually learn to meditate. And also, I was a very restless character, so when I did try to meditate, I could never manage more than 10 minutes. And often I would sit and find that I'd got up before I realized I'd got up. Or something, you know what I mean? I'd find myself in the kitchen and think, how did I get here? Yeah. So I wasn't a very good meditator. And the first 4 or 5 years of my life as a Buddhist, when I did learn how to practice and started to develop more awareness and so on, were very difficult, those first 4 or 5 years. Becoming more aware meant that I was encountering some of that baggage that I got from that Catholic indoctrination from a very early age. Things that I hadn't known had affected me, lots of guilt, lots of self-hatred, all sorts of things that I had that I started encountering, which I hadn't really known about before. All kind of, yes, parts of my character or psyche I was discovering through meditation. So I had quite a difficult time. I won't go into all of that. Just to say, I had to work on myself quite a lot to get to know myself and to change myself and so on. I had to work on myself quite a lot. But I did, and I was, as Amala City said, I did get ordained. Actually, I tried to get ordained twice. The first time I was invited for ordination, but I had a bit of a breakdown before it, so I actually fell apart emotionally and so on. Anyway, the second time in 1988, I did get ordained, and that was, for me, that was a fantastic occasion. It gave me a lot of confidence, being affirmed by people that I really respected and looked up to gave me a lot of confidence. Getting ordained doesn't mean that you've made any you got any particular attainments or anything like that. And for me, that was definitely the case, because I still had a lot of stuff that I had to work with, and still had times when I would fall into very difficult mental states and so on. But sometime after, I did manage to have a bit of a breakthrough through all of that. Broke through some of the kind of, I don't know what you call it, self-obsession and so on that I was prone to at the time. And I remember, I won't go into it in detail, but I remember a particular occasion when something happened which kind of cleared away a lot of things that had been troubling and bothering me. And the result of that, over time, it didn't happen immediately, but over time what I noticed is that I stopped getting into really bad mental states. And I became much happier, and the main result of it was that I was more available to other people. I was able to be there for other people much more, which was quite a turnaround. So it led to a more expansive kind of sense of what spiritual life was about. And from that I began to take on more responsibility within the spiritual community. I was managing a health food shop which belonged to Sri Ratna in London. I did that for about 5 years, and then I took on being the chairman or spiritual director, or whatever you want to call it, of the London Buddhist Centre, which I did for 9 years. London Buddhist Centre, by the way, is much more active and bigger than this centre. So, yeah. And in a way, that's what my spiritual life has been about ever since. It's been about sharing with others my understandings and my experience of spiritual practice, and helping to create the conditions that will help other people to follow the path that I managed to follow. In a way, what I want to do is create the conditions where, rather than a haphazard meeting with a monk, more and more people are able to meet with something where they can get some clarity about spiritual path right from the start, as it were. So at least you've got the conditions. You still have to do the work yourself, obviously, but you've got the conditions in which to do it. So that's been my practice as an order member, largely, and that still is my practice. That's what I'm doing here at the Cambridge Buddhist Centre. I'm kind of, as it were, guiding the Cambridge Buddhist Centre, spiritually speaking, as well as doing lots of practical things, as Amala City knows. And yes, I'm glad that I'm able to do that, and that I've got the experience and so on to do that. So, and I do that for my own sake, because I need the conditions. I need other people around me who are practicing. I need the support of a whole community and so on. And of course I do it for the sake of others. And that's what's going to lead me on to talking about the Bodhisattva ideal, because what the Bodhisattva ideal is about, really, it's about, well, how it's said traditionally is what you're trying to do as a Bodhisattva. A Bodhisattva simply means, a Bodhi means awakening, Sattva is a being, so it's an awakening being, somebody who's awakening, somebody who's trying to wake up to the nature of reality. And traditionally what a Bodhisattva is somebody who's trying to awake for the sake of themselves and the sake of others. Yeah, so it's, if you like, this takes in the wisdom and compassion aspect of Buddhism. So you could say that a spiritual path or a spiritual life, broadly there are two approaches to it, two approaches to spiritual life. One is you focus on yourself, yeah? You focus on getting to know yourself, you focus on transforming yourself, you focus on discovering more and more the subtleties of how your mind works and how you create a self, how you create what Buddhism would call a delusion of a self, how you function, as it were. So that's one way you would practice, and the other side of it is where. So the reason you would practice like that, from the Buddhist perspective, is what you're trying to see through the fact that we have a strong kind of view of ourselves as a fixed and separate kind of being, a fixed and separate ego identity, as it were. And we're trying to see through that and see that that isn't really the case. According to Buddhism, that isn't really how things are. Things are much more fluid than that. So one way of seeing through that is to really work on yourself through things like meditation and so on, and really see deeply into how your whole mind and psyche works and how it functions. The other way of approaching it is that you don't focus so much on yourself, you focus on working for the benefit of others and expanding out. And what that would lead to is a much stronger sense of the interconnection between self and others, or even the non-difference, the non-separateness between self and others over time. You expand out and expand out and expand out, where that whole sense of ego identity just kind of breaks down. Now that, maybe I've made that sound kind of easy, but it isn't. It isn't easy at all. And also, the point is, although I said there are two broad approaches, actually you need both. It's not like you can approach spiritual life purely in the sense of looking inwards, and neither is it the case that you can approach it purely by looking outwards. You have to do both at the same time, and it's that dynamic of really working on yourself in interaction with others. That's that dynamic which really transforms yourself and also transforms your environment. Yeah? So you could talk about those approaches being like contemplative and active, wisdom and compassion, self and other, those different kind of approaches. And of course, as I said, meditation would be one thing, study, ethics, friendship, communication, going on retreat, all of those are the kind of practices you will be doing to get to know yourself better, to really investigate and explore who you are and what you are. The other side of it would be things like generosity, again ethics, because ethics is relational in Buddhism. All the principles of ethics are all relational. The whole business of spiritual community, I think Amla Siddhi mentioned at the beginning, coming together with like-minded people or people who want to live a meaningful life. So you're creating these conditions, kind of a cradle of conditions in which you can practice. Sometimes we talk about this another way of talking about the whole of spiritual practice is thinking in terms of, well, there's the practices, there's the meditation, there's the ethics, there's the rituals, there's the retreats and so on. And there's also then something like not the practices, but service, as it were. You're actually doing something for others. So it's not for you, but you're doing something for others. So we talk about Dharma practice, Dharma service. And then the other thing, which is to do with conditions, is you look at your lifestyle. And what I mean by lifestyle is not, the kind of where you go to buy your clothing or something like that. What I mean by lifestyle is something like living a simpler life or living a more contented life, so that you you're creating the conditions which enable you to be ethical, conditions that enable you to meditate, the conditions that enable you to really live out your spiritual values and live out the kind of meaning in life that you want to live out. And to do all of that, you need other people. You need community. You need a community of people who support what you're doing. And in Sri Ratna, over the years, we've developed communal living. We've developed working together and so on as practices, as it were. So it's a way of simplifying your life down, that you live with other people who share your values, who share your approach to life and so on. Or you work with other people, or you do both. You live and work. I've done both on occasions, live and work with other people. And it's very, very supportive of your practice. So it's a bit like you have the practice of working on yourself. Here you have the practice of helping others, as it were. And the feet or the ground you stand on is the kind of lifestyle you lead, how you live your life. Maybe having a simpler life, a life that supports all of that. Yeah. And the other aspect of how you live your life is that if collectively we live our lives in a way that supports our values and supports a life that's really meaningful, then if we live our lives like that collectively, then we're modeling something for the rest of society. We're creating a model, we're creating an example, and that is something that then can have a bigger influence as well. We can have an influence society by living out positive values, by living out kindness, living out generosity, living out contentment, living out honesty, living out mindfulness. So that's different from just talking about them or being interested in them. You actually live them out in your life. You put them into every aspect of your life. And that's how you then, if you're doing that collectively with a lot of people, then you really have an influence in the world, which is a quite different approach to, say, engaging in ideological debates or engaging in politics or something like that. It's quite a different approach because some of those other ways of engaging create us and them. What you want to do is live out your values in a way that doesn't create us and them. It just influences positively the world around you, the immediate world around you, and then that has a flowing out effect on others. So, in order to do any of that, we do need to work on ourselves. We do need to become very aware of our own minds, our own tendencies, our own habits, our own subtle egotism, or maybe not so subtle egotism. We do need to become very aware of that because you have to really work on yourself to embody the qualities that you want to give to the world. Yeah, you can't give something that you don't have. You can only talk about it if you don't have it. In order to really give, you have to transform yourself if you want to transform the world. Yeah, that's a basic kind of tenet, you could say, of Buddhism. So I'll just say a little bit about the traditional practice of the Bodhisattva, since that's what I was asked to talk about. And I'm doing this bit in order to set you up for the next weeks that Amala City has planned for you. So the traditional practice of the Bodhisattva, the person who's living out the spiritual life in this way that I've been talking about, it's laid out as a path. And the first part of that path is what's known as the 4 preliminary practices, or the 4 preliminary reflections. And that is reflecting, first of all, that this life you have is a precious opportunity. So that's the first reflection. You're just reflecting that you've got a life which is a precious opportunity. You can do something with it. The second reflection is that you're going to die. Yeah, and that everything is impermanent, nothing lasts forever. That's the second reflection. The third reflection is on karma. In other words, actions have consequences. Positive actions have positive consequences. Negative actions have negative consequences. And the fourth reflection is on how nothing in the world can satisfy you completely because it won't last. Yeah, that's putting it really briefly. There are quite a list of things you can reflect on under each of those headings, and there's a traditional kind of practice that goes through all of those things. I'm sure if you're more interested, Emma City can find it for you. After that preliminary practice of reflecting on those things and really taking them into your life and so on, the next stage of the Bodhisattva path is the emotional engagement with the practices and with the path. Yeah, this practice is ritually recited, as it were, in a shrine room as a puja, but it's also to be lived out. So that the first part of it is that you're seeing the goal, as it were. You're seeing what you're aiming for. You have an intuition of where you're trying to get to, or at least of what the qualities are you're trying to unfold. So you have that intuition of that, and you have a sense of aspiring to something. Then comes the sense of making a commitment to that, to really saying, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. Yeah. So you're making a commitment to it. And then there's the recognizing the obstacles that get in the way. So those obstacles may be internal, your own habits, your own anger, your own greed. Often what I find with people, it's their attitudes towards themselves are the biggest obstacle, their own self-hatred or whatever. The attitudes towards ourselves are often the biggest problem on the spiritual path. So there's recognizing obstacles, then there's recognizing the positive factors or the positive conditions in our lives, the things that actually really help us to move forward. And then there's this stage of being receptive or being open to learning from those who can teach you and so on. So that's all, as I said, represented ritually in what's called the Anuttara Puja, which means the incomparable worship. But it's done as a ritual in order to almost like dramatically encapsulate the whole of that path, just to dramatically encapsulate it. So it's like the ritual is like a drama, which tells you how to move forward. But then each stage refers to a practice, as it were, refers to a way of looking at life. And that particular ritual is taken from a long poem by an Indian poet from the 8th century, Shantideva. So the whole point of this stage of the path is emotional engagement with what you're doing, really engaging with it, orientating yourself, body, speech and mind, as we say in Buddhism, towards Buddhahood or towards your highest values, your highest ideals, for the sake of yourself and for the sake of others. And then after those two stages, the 4 reminders, the emotional engagement, comes what's known as the 6 perfections. The 6 perfections are what the Bodhisattva practices. Yeah? And the 6 perfections are generosity, ethics, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. I'll say a little bit about each one and then I'll close. Yeah? So generosity is basically what it's about is letting go of possessiveness. It's letting go of possessiveness towards anything or anyone. It's about living a simple life. It's about having a sense of abundance, a sense of richness and giving. Ethics encapsulates the principles of non-violence, generosity, contentment, honesty, and awareness or mindfulness. Those are the principles of ethics. And ethics is a progressive training. It's not about becoming something overnight or changing something overnight. It's about training yourself in kindness, training yourself in honesty, and so on. And all of these things, by the way, apply to how you relate to yourself as well as how you relate to others. So honesty, for instance, you can be honest with yourself or not so honest with yourself. You can be honest or not so honest with others. So the principles are giving you a guidance or like a guideline. This is the direction to go if you really want to practice. Then patience. Patience is about, well, it's about that receptivity, being receptive to teachings and so on. It's about tolerance, tolerance of difference with other people, but also tolerance of yourself, again, receptivity, tolerance, and it's about obviously just patience, being patient, understanding that things take time. If you, for instance, if you practice meditation, you may not have a brilliant, wonderful meditation every time you sit down to practice, but if you just keep doing it constantly, every day or whatever, in time, the results come. That's how it works. Energy. With energy, we're talking about, well, unblocking any energy that's too held or tight or whatever. You're unblocking the energy, refining the energy that's too coarse, and conserving energy as well, because sometimes our energy just dissipates out in distractions of all kinds. Yeah. Meditation is about integrating ourselves as complete human beings, as it were. It's about developing positive emotions. It's been referred to as being a continuous flow of positive mental states, meditation. And obviously it encompasses those techniques that we teach here. And wisdom is talked about in terms of listening, reflecting, meditating. So it's listening to the teachings, listening, hearing them, just taking them in. Then there's reflecting, which is a bit like making them your own, in the sense of understanding what they mean in terms of your life, or making sense of them for yourself. It's not just about taking them in and being able to repeat them verbatim or like that. You have to make sense of them in your life, because, as I said earlier, really the practice is about living out these things. And then it's also about meditating. Meditating in this instance is taking things deeper, taking them even deeper into your life, so they actually really transform you, they really change you. So the essence of the Bodhisattva ideal is summed up in one sentence, and that sentence is, you cannot help yourself without helping others. You cannot really help others without helping yourself. That's the essence of the Bodhisattva ideal. You cannot help yourself without helping others. You cannot really help others without helping yourself. That's it.